Then Aldrich set the envelope on the table, and the room went completely still. Maren Aldrich Vale, 38-year-old wife of Aldrich Vale, had spent the last 4 years building something in silence. Not because she was afraid, not because she lacked the words, but because she understood, better than most, that the loudest thing a woman could do was wait. The envelope sat between them like a verdict, white, crisp, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself. Aldrich had slid it across the dining table the way someone might slide a parking ticket, casually, with an air of inconvenience, as though what was inside it was her problem to deal with and not his fault. "I think we need to talk about the future," he said. Maren looked at the envelope, then at him, then she picked up her coffee cup and took a long, slow sip. She did not open it. To understand what happened that evening, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the romantic to the beginning, not the part where Aldrich Vale, 41-year-old senior partner at Veldmark & Associates, first walked into the charity gala and spotted Maren across the room. Not that story. Go back further. Go back to the version of Maren that existed before him. Maren had grown up the daughter of a structural engineer and a woman who ran a small textile import business out of their garage in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her mother, Dolores, had calluses on her hands and a leather ledger she never let anyone touch. Her father, Gene, worked on bridges. He used to say that a structure doesn't fail from one big crack. It fails from 100 small ones that nobody bothered to fix. Maren had grown up believing that. She still did. She had studied finance at UNC, then worked 3 years at a mid-size investment firm in Raleigh before getting recruited to Atlanta, where she spent another 4 years doing the kind of work that doesn't get written about in magazines, but that quietly shapes the landscape of entire industries. She had a head for systems, for seeing where money was moving before it announced itself. Her supervisor at the time, a woman named Dr. Fenn, once told her that Maren had the rarest kind of intelligence, the kind that didn't need to be seen to be effective. She met Aldrich at a charity gala in Atlanta. It was a Thursday. She had gone reluctantly, as a favor to a colleague. Aldrich Vale was handsome in the way that certain men are handsome, purposefully, deliberately, as though they have studied the effect their appearance has on others and have adjusted accordingly. He wore a charcoal suit and said the right things and laughed at the right moments, and by the end of the evening had asked for her number in a way that felt less like a question and more like an assumption. She gave it to him anyway. They married 18 months later, a small ceremony. Maren's mother cried. Aldrich's father, Rupert Vale, 68-year-old retired bank executive, shook Maren's hand at the reception with the particular firmness of a man who has decided someone is acceptable but not ideal, she noticed. She filed it away. What Aldrich did not know, what almost no one knew, was that during the first year of their marriage, while he was building his practice and collecting clients, and telling his colleagues about his wife, who used to work in finance, but had stepped back to figure out what she wanted, Maren had been doing something else entirely. She had co-founded a company called Viridian Capital Partners, not under her married name, under Maren D. Holloway, her mother's maiden name, which Maren had quietly applied to her business filings 3 months before the wedding, a decision she couldn't fully explain at the time, but that she had trusted nonetheless. The company started small, a private investment advisory firm focused on mid-market real estate development and infrastructure funds, the kind of work that Maren understood at a molecular level and that most people found too technical to bother asking about. Within 2 years, Viridian had closed its first major fund, $40 million. Within 3, they had expanded into commercial real estate debt and brought on 2 new partners. By the time the dining table incident happened, Viridian Capital Partners had $380 million in assets under advisement, a team of 19 people, and a reputation in the industry that Maren wore like a second skin. Quietly, completely, in a room that Aldrich had never once entered. He knew she had done some consulting work. He knew she had a home office. He knew she kept unusual hours and sometimes took calls behind closed doors. He had never asked her, not once in 4 years, what the work actually was. She had noticed that too. The first sign that something was wrong came not from Aldrich but from his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Blythe, who had worked with him for 6 years and who had the specific, cautious energy of someone who knows more than she is saying. Blythe called Maren's cell phone on a Tuesday morning in March and asked with unusual delicacy whether Maren had plans for the upcoming Friday evening. Aldrich's schedule shows a client dinner, Blythe said. Maren was looking at her laptop. On her screen was a wire confirmation. She minimized the tab. He mentioned it, she said. Right, a pause. The reservation is at Hensley's, table for 2. Hensley's was the kind of restaurant that required planning, the kind of place where the lighting was chosen to make people look like they were already in love. Maren thanked Blythe and hung up. She did not confront Aldrich that week. She did not cry or spiral or call her best friend in a panic. What she did was contact a firm she had used twice before for due diligence work, a private investigative service based in Buckhead, and she asked them to begin a quiet, thorough review of Aldrich Vale's recent activities, business and personal. She told them she needed documentation, receipts, records, anything verifiable. Then she went back to work. Her partner at Viridian, a methodical man named Owen who had known Maren since grad school, noticed nothing different about her in the weeks that followed. She showed up on time, she asked good questions, she signed off on 2 deals that closed ahead of schedule. She was, as she had always been, the calmest person in any room she entered. That was not numbness, it was something else. It was the particular composure of a woman who has already decided what she is going to do and is simply waiting for the right moment to do it. The investigator's name was Selden. He called her on a Wednesday afternoon 6 weeks later. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "I have a report ready for your review." She met him at a coffee shop on Peachtree Road. He slid a folder across the table, brown, unremarkable, and she opened it without hesitation. There were photographs, receipts from Hensley's, dated across 4 separate evenings, a hotel record from a property in Midtown, a place called the Ashby, that showed room charges billed to a corporate card registered in Aldrich's name through Veldmark. There were screenshots of messages, obtained legally through the firm's licensed methods, between Aldrich and a woman named Petra Wynne, 34, a junior associate at a separate law firm across town. The messages were in the manner of such things, both predictable and painful. They described plans. They described feelings. One of them, sent on a Sunday evening, described Maren in terms that Selden had quietly highlighted in yellow and that she read twice before closing the folder. She sat with the folder in her lap for a moment. "How long?" she asked. "Based on what we found, approximately 14 months, Selden said. Maren nodded slowly. She picked up the rest of it, set the cup down. "I'll need certified copies of everything," she said. "And I'll need a timeline formatted for legal review." Selden looked at her for a moment. "Of course," he said. She drove home. She cooked dinner. When Aldrich came home at 7:30 and said he'd been at the office late, she told him the pasta was on the stove and that she'd eaten already. He said thank you. She went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. Not crying, not planning, just sitting, giving herself exactly that, the evening. Tomorrow she would begin. What Maren did not know was that 2 weeks before the dining table incident, Aldrich's father had been on the phone with one of his old banking contacts, a man named Forsyth, who ran a regional commercial real estate portfolio and had spent 20 minutes talking about a firm called Viridian Capital Partners. "Extraordinary team," Rupert Vale had told Forsyth, the pride in his voice unmistakable. "Best infrastructure fund I've seen come out of Atlanta in a decade. That Holloway woman who runs it, sharp as a blade. Don't know where she came from, but she's built something remarkable." Forsyth had agreed. He and his firm were already in Viridian's third fund. Rupert Vale had ended the call and poured himself a scotch and thought, not for the first time, that he wished his own family produced that kind of ambition. He had no idea. The envelope Aldrich set on the dining table that Wednesday evening contained, as Maren had already suspected, a letter drafted by a family law attorney. It was 4 pages. It outlined Aldrich's intention to file for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. It referenced a proposed asset division. It made several confident assumptions about Maren's financial standing, assumptions that were, in almost every particular, embarrassingly wrong. "I think it's better if we do this cleanly," Aldrich said. He was standing near the window. He had the look of a man who has rehearsed a conversation and is now performing it, without things getting complicated. Maren set down her coffee cup. She looked at him. Not because she didn't know, because she wanted to hear him say it. "We've grown apart," he said. "I think we both know that, do we, Maren?" He exhaled. "I'm not trying to make this hard." She looked at the letter. She looked at him. Then she said, "Do you know a firm called Viridian Capital Partners?" He blinked. "What?" "Viridian Capital Partners, investment advisory, based here in Atlanta. Your father mentions them occasionally. He thinks highly of them." Aldrich frowned. "I think I've heard the name. Why?" "Your father was on the phone with his friend Forsyth 2 weeks ago," she said. "He was praising the woman who runs it. Said she was sharp as a blade." Something shifted in Aldrich's expression. Not understanding yet. Just the first edge of unease, the way a building feels before the supports give. "Okay," he said slowly. "What does that have to do with?" "I am Viridian Capital Partners," Maren said. The room did what rooms do when something irreversible has been said. It held itself perfectly still. "I founded it 4 years ago," she continued. "Registered under my mother's maiden name. We currently manage $380 million in assets. Your father has spoken about my company at his banking dinners, at least twice that I'm aware of. His friend Forsyth is an investor in our third fund." She paused. He's never met me in a professional context, so he doesn't know. But your father has been praising my work for 2 years without knowing it was mine. Aldrich stared at her. She waited. He started. The proposed asset division in that letter, she said, and she nodded toward the envelope, is based on the assumption that I have limited independent income. I thought you should know that before we proceed. What happened in the 3 weeks that followed was, in the legal sense, relatively straightforward. Marin's attorney, a woman named Georgette, who had been Marin's quiet insurance policy for the past 8 months, filed a counter-response to Aldrich's petition that detailed, in full, the scope of Marin's financial position. Not to wound him, not to humiliate him, simply to establish fact. Aldrich's attorney, a man who had been brought in under the assumption that this would be a short, uncomplicated process, asked for 2 continuances. Marin granted them both. There were conversations then, careful ones, conference rooms, legal pads. The particular exhaustion of 2 people dismantling what had once been a life together, piece by piece, in fluorescent lighting. Aldrich had hired a financial analyst to review Viridian's filings. The analyst had called back within 48 hours and told Aldrich's team to reconsider their approach entirely. They reconsidered. What Marin did not do during any of this was speak publicly about what Aldrich had done. She did not tell friends. She did not call his father. She did not contact Petra Wynne. She had the documentation certified and formatted, and she handed it to Georgette, and Georgette used it with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this work for 20 years and understands exactly how much a piece of paper can accomplish when handled correctly. She also did not tell Aldrich what she felt about the 14 months, about the Sunday evening message, about the way he'd said, "I'm not trying to make this hard," as though he were doing her a favor. She kept all of that in a private place, the way her mother had kept the leather ledger, close, careful, hers alone. The moment Rupert Vale found out was not through his son, it was through Forsyth. Forsyth had been at an industry dinner in October, a real estate investment forum at the Intercontinental, when he'd finally met the managing director of Viridian Capital Partners in person for the first time. A woman in a charcoal blazer, quiet handshake, direct eye contact. He'd introduced himself and said she knew who he was, that he was an investor in her 3rd fund, and that she was glad to meet him in person. He'd said, "And you are?" She'd said, "Marin Holloway Vale. We've spoken by email." Forsyth had gone home and called Rupert the next morning. The call lasted 9 minutes. Rupert Vale sat in his armchair in his Buckhead home and listened to his old friend describe, in exact terms, who Marin was and what Viridian was and what it represented, and he did not say a single word until Forsyth had finished. Then he said, "She's my daughter-in-law." And Forsyth said, "Was, I think, Rupert?"
From what I understand.
The silence that followed was long enough that Forsyth checked his phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Rupert called his son that same afternoon. The conversation was brief, and by most accounts, unpleasant. Aldrich attempted to explain. Rupert was not particularly interested in the explanation. What he was interested in, what had settled into him with the particular weight of a mistake that cannot be undone, was the fact that he had spent 2 years admiring a woman's work, praising her to colleagues, calling her sharp as a blade, and she had been in his family the entire time, and his son had not known, or had not thought to ask. Marin's first morning after the divorce was finalized was a Thursday in November. She woke up at 6, made coffee, stood at her kitchen window in the early grey light, and looked at the street below where a neighbor was walking a dog. And the leaves were doing what leaves do in November, giving up gracefully without drama. She had kept the house, not because it was the most valuable asset. It wasn't. But because she had chosen the neighborhood herself, had planted the 2 Japanese maples in the front yard with her own hands, had painted the dining room the particular shade of green that she loved, and that Aldrich had always said was too dark. It was not too dark. It was exactly right. She took her coffee to the home office and opened her laptop. There were 3 emails from Owen, 2 from Georgette's office confirming final documentation, and 1 from Forsyth, sent the previous evening, asking if she might be interested in a conversation about a 4th fund when she was ready. She replied to Forsyth first. Outside, the neighbor's dog found something interesting in a pile of leaves and stopped walking to investigate it. The neighbor waited, patient. The morning did what mornings do. Marin set down her coffee cup. She opened the first of Owen's emails and began to read. There was a deal in front of them, a mixed-use development in Savannah, unusual structure, the kind of thing that required careful thinking and a particular kind of steadiness. She felt, settling through her like good weather, the specific and uncomplicated satisfaction of a woman who has rebuilt herself entirely in the space between what she was expected to be and what she actually was. She began to type. Aldrich Vale, still sorting through the implications of a settlement that had surprised his entire legal team, sent her a message that morning that she would read later. It said, simply, "I should have asked." She read it once. She did not reply. She had already moved on.